It's hard for the children of Liverpool today to imagine their city as being in the front line of a world war. But in the late summer of 1939, that's exactly how it was. The children of the Blitz are from a generation that are the last surviving eyewitnesses of the devastation inflicted on the city of Liverpool, a city that refused to be cowed into submission by the Nazi war machine. Early in September, it became clear that war was inevitable, and hurried arrangements were started for the evacuation of school children, pregnant women, and mothers with babies.
The information my mother and father had had from school, the Liverpool Collegiate School in Shore Street, saying that they were evacuating and giving details of where the children would be picked up and where they would be taken to. And then I was taken to North Wales with the rest of the classes. When we arrived in Bangor, we all were marshalled to Church Hall. I don't quite know exactly where in Bangor it was. And we were all given bags of food, like cornflakes and margarine and tinned beans and things for each one. I don't know how they, but all the children, we all had bags before we were taken in taxis.
Drever Kendrick was born in 1925 and lived in the Knotty Ash area of Liverpool. Drever was evacuated to a school in Bangor, North Wales, but then returned to Liverpool, where he volunteered as a Home Guard messenger.
There was two of us went to the house, but the other lad that was with me, he was homesick from the word go. And eventually he had to find a telephone and telephoned his parents. And they came out in a car and took him home. But I stayed with Mr. and Mrs. Foster. I was very happy there.
On the 3rd of September 1939, war was finally declared, and it was obvious that Liverpool, with its docks, vital railway connections and factories, would be a prime target for Hitler's Luftwaffe.
When the Germans drew up their plans for the Battle of Britain and the invasion of Britain, they obviously picked out some targets. Now, Liverpool was seen to be basically the second major city to be targeted. Why? Because, of course, it was the major port for trade with the Empire and also with America. Also, America was supplying us as well with weaponry under a scheme called Lend-Lease. So, in other words, Liverpool was a very important port, very important for the Navy as well, and for the Merchant Marine. You know, this was the place where the Battle of the Atlantic started to be fought later on in the war. They were going to break Britain up into different regions. One of them was going to be a northwest region as well. Sadly, Manchester was going to be the centre of the Nazi northwest region, not Liverpool. We've lost out again.
People feared that attacks on the city would begin immediately, and the evacuation Operation Pied Piper had actually begun weeks before Prime Minister Chamberlain made his wireless announcement that the nation was at war with Germany.
I do remember Neville Chamberlain saying that as from, I think it was 11 o'clock, we are in a state of war with Germany. I remember that.
Robert was born in 1925 and lived in Walton. Unlike many other children, he was never evacuated, and he has vivid memories of the Blitz in the north of the city.
Well, our parents were asked before the war broke out whether they wanted us to be evacuated or not, and our parents decided they didn't want us to go. So most of the children in the school were evacuated. As far as I know, most of them went to Skelmersdale. But we didn't. We stayed at home.
By the end of September of that year, a total of around 130,000 women and children had left Merseyside to be housed with host families in the countryside, while a few also went overseas.
I must have been about 6 when I was evacuated, out to a place called Tanny-Vron, which was out just outside Wrexham. That was the actual village, Tanny-Vron. With an old Welsh couple, yeah. They all lived in a very oldie worldy cottage. My sister was with me, my elder sister, and she hated every minute. She cried morning, noon and night, wanted to come home. But being a boy, I suppose I just lived with her a bit easier than the girl. Well, basically that was it, yeah.
Aged just 5 at the start of the war, Frank has vivid memories of the bombing of Edge Hill. Frank was evacuated to the village of Tanavron near Wrexham with his sister at the age of 6.
They were mainly taken, the children of Liverpool were taken to North Wales. Now, of course, this was in close proximity, out of German bombing raid area. The Germans never bombed that area. It's a rural community. But what was interesting was, back in 1939, the majority of people in North Wales spoke Welsh. So the children not only had to go to this rural community, many of them have never seen the countryside before. And also, the Welsh houses were very small. So many of them were sent into small Welsh houses with a family that didn't even speak English. So that must have been disorientating. Then, of course, some of them went to boarding schools. So some boarding schools had to take children. So that made it sort of easier. So some of them ended up in boarding schools, and they ended up with a strange family, of course.
Well, as I say, I can remember the whole school and my mother and Jean as a baby. And we all were gone to Shropshire. And my brother and I ended up in the middle of Shrewsbury. It was a terraced house on the main road, I can remember that. And Jean and my mother went somewhere else. And I hated it. I cried every night for my mother.
Dorothy Latter was born in 1933 and had just celebrated her 6th birthday at her home in Edge Hill when war was declared.
We came home after about 3 or 4 weeks because there was nothing happening. There was no bombing. There was nothing happening in Liverpool. And we all came home. And I can remember being home for the beginning of 1940 because we had a very bad winter and the snow was 3 or 4 feet deep. I can remember that.
I was 3 when the phony war, and I can remember going to Shrewsbury with my mother. And the lady of the house, I didn't like her. She used to make me sit on the step and not move. I can remember saying, "Don't move." And my mother was asked to clean the 3 bedrooms. But I had to sit at the front door, and no toys, nothing. I just had to sit there. And I was so frightened. I did. I never moved. And after, I think it was only 2 weeks, Mum came home and brought my brother and sister from. They were in different house than us, further down. But I can remember that step, sitting on it. It sticks out in my memory, a 3-year-old.
Jean and her mother were evacuated to Shropshire, but they only stayed for about 4 weeks. The phony war saw Jean and her mother return to Liverpool, where they remained for the rest of the war.
For those who were left behind, they clung on to their mothers more, and for those who went away, again, that was difficult because they grew attachments to the surrogate family that they'd had in places like Wales, and some of them went on visiting them later. So you can see, war is not just about bombing, it's not just about killing people. There's also psychological effects, and the psychological effects of the Blitz and evacuation were dramatic.
But with no sign of any bombs falling from the sky, back in Liverpool, the talk was of the phony war. A war that was slow to start, with no major engagements between Allied troops and the Nazis on the Western Front. It was in these circumstances some Liverpool parents decided to bring their children back home to the city in time for Christmas 1939, and many of them remained.
So what happened then was, well, nothing happened. It became known as the phony war. Not a single bomb was dropped on Britain until 1940, 8 months later, and it killed a guy in Scotland, just one guy called James Ibbister. He was the first person to die in the Second World War. The war went on at sea. Of course, there were sort of, submarine attacks. Some ships went down, but there was no attack on Western Europe. They called it sort of Sitzkrieg. In other words, nobody was doing anything. They eventually called it the phony war.
But the phony war would not last forever. In May 1940, German troops invaded France and the Low Countries, and very soon life for the children of Liverpool was to change dramatically. In May 1940, Germany invaded France and the Low Countries. In the space of 6 weeks, France, Belgium, Luxembourg and the Low Countries all fell. Allied troops had been routed, and only thanks to a mixture of luck and determination, some say a miracle, more than 190,000 service personnel were evacuated from Dunkirk. It left only the RAF, supported by anti-aircraft Ack guns, as the last line of defence between German bombers and the prime targets of the United Kingdom. The Battle of France was over, and the Battle of Britain was about to begin. And in Liverpool, the city and its people prepared for the worst.
Gradually they started the bombing, and it wasn't too heavy at first, and we had an air raid shelter outside the house, and we went there. And as it got heavier, as the months went on, we went to Littlewood's underground shelter, which was across Wavertree Park. And that's where I think most of the people from Edge Hill went, because there were hundreds and hundreds of us. And you would see, come 6 o'clock, people trudging across the park with their bedding and bags and children and everything, and we'd all bed down for the night. And then when it stopped about 6 in the morning, we'd all come home, and my brother and I would then go around the streets looking for shrapnel.
Well, the whole of the town went up. Lewis's and Blacklers, as it's Witherspoons now, and my mum stood us on the dressing table. We were 5 miles away, and my mum stood us on the dressing table in the bedroom, and it was just a red sky, and she said, "I want you to remember this." She said, "This is history."
June was born in 1933. She was a patient at Alderhay Hospital when war broke out.
We were given air raid shelters, and you had to put them up in your back garden. And in the end, we had to go in straight after tea because the bombing was so bad. There were 2 bunks either side, and my brother and I, he was only little, shared a bunk. We were head to tail, and my sister was in the bunk opposite. And my brother and I, in the condensation, used to draw pictures along the wall and join them up. I remember that, and my mum slept on a camp bed on the floor, on the floor. But the thing was, everybody did it, so you really didn't think it was anything different. It was just a way of life to us.
First of all, the Luftwaffe bombs airfields. Fantastically successful they were. They were knocking out all of our airfields one by one. And then, for some strange reason, Goering says, well, let's give the civilian population, a taste of war. Let's bomb London. What they were going to do is continue to bomb us in what would be called punishment bombings.
The first major air raid on Liverpool took place on the night of Wednesday the 28th of August 1940, when 160 bombers attacked the city. Waves of bombers returned for the next 3 nights, and then regularly for the remainder of the year.
It was quite frightening, really, and then you'd have the warden outside saying, I think this is one of ours, or I think this is one of theirs, and you're thinking, any minute now, you know, we're going to have a bomb.
Mary was born in 1925. She was 14 when the war began. Very soon, Mary started work and joined the war effort at a factory in the city centre.
I do remember when we were in the shelter, the wardens used to shout out, and you could hear, you know, like firecrackers, I suppose, and they would be saying, oh, that's an incendiary, it's dropped here and dropped there. But there was nothing destroyed in the flats. You know, no flats were destroyed, or nothing in the shelter.
I think it was a weekend, I can't remember whether it was a Saturday or Sunday, but the sirens went, and then we heard the planes, and then we heard the bombs. But they weren't very big bombs, they were, should we say, a stick of small ones, like, see. We had relatives living in that area, and one bomb dropped in the Dovecot Park, near the duck pond. I remember seeing that crater myself. And several bombs dropped in Swanside Road and Swanside Avenue. No houses were directly hit as such. Very close, and you know, windows blown out and that sort of thing, roof tiles blown off. But all the water mains and gas mains were, you know, damaged and so on. So our relatives who couldn't cook and had no power came up to our house to ask could they cook the weekend meat and whatnot in my mother's oven, like, you know. And that was my first realisation of war bombing, like, say, yeah.
There were 50 raids on the city during a 3-month period. Some of these were minor, comprising a few aircraft and lasting a matter of minutes. Other raids saw 300 aircraft raining down bombs over a period of 10 hours.
We went to town and we saw it all, and well, there was just nothing there at all. Church Street and Lord Street were just, well, they were just bomb sites, weren't they? There was just not. Victoria Monument stood, and that was about all, really. I think they kept an awful lot from us.
It was awful, awful, yeah. I mean, Dorothy Street was bombed considerably, all Wavertree Road, lots of Wavertree Road was bombed. The particular bad one was the one in Durning Road, was the school. And I walked past there, and I vaguely remember walking past there with my brother or my sister, and it had what they call a landmine on it, I think it was. And that was flattened, and there were a lot of people killed there.
Thursday, the 28th of November, saw a heavy raid and a notoriously horrific incident. The direct hit on an air raid shelter in Durning Road, Edge Hill, caused 166 deaths, a loss of life that Winston Churchill later described as the single worst incident of the war on the home front.
They were evacuated, this family, to the Chapel House in Nazareth, and they lived in Clinch Road, and they went in it, and they got out through a window that had blown in, and they crawled out, and I think there were 6 of them, the family, 6 or 7 of them, and they crawled out through there. But they said it was horrific because the boilers burst and people were scalded to death, really, and they could hear the screams.
So you can see the idea was to weaken military morale. You know, bomb a major city. Coventry was hit very hard in the autumn of 1940, for example. Liverpool took a massive hit, a place called Durning Road, which is actually by Edge Hill Station. So up until Christmas, the Blitz was really at its height at that point. So, and we obviously at that point, certain parts of Liverpool were hit.
On the home front, the risk of being killed by a bomb was not the only peril for the children of the Blitz. Rationing was to change their way of life for the duration of the war and beyond. The first commodity to be rationed was petrol, but that was followed on the 8th of January 1940 by bacon, butter and sugar. This was followed by successive schemes for rationing of meat, tea, jam, biscuits, breakfast cereals, cheese, eggs, lard, milk, along with canned and dried fruit.
We just got a meal put down in front of us, and you ate it and you finished it. You just couldn't, you didn't have the option, you just had to finish everything there. And when you think of it, it was doing very, very poor. It was quite poor. My mum did an awful lot of baking, tremendous amount of bake, as they all did, I'd imagine. But you never saw any, there was no fat children at all, no fat children. But then there was never any, nobody was malnourished.
14 years of rationing we had, yeah. No, we had no sweets. There was very little sugar. We had 2 ounces of butter per week. I think 1 egg and so many ounces of bacon. No, there was nothing really that we could eat. But we used to eat a lot of raw vegetables, us kids, yeah.
And that's why we call that generation the golden generation, because they were special. And they were made special by the shared experience that they went through in the Blitz itself. So in a way, the Liverpool we are today and all of our ancestry of our grandfathers and great-grandfathers is transferred from that spirit. The spirit we have in Liverpool is a spirit of defiance, and that was what was there in the Blitz.
The children of the Blitz gave these interviews aged in their 80s and 90s, often recalling events that had been buried in their memory for years. We thank them and salute them and their generation for the sacrifices they made. Tune in to the next episode to hear how war became a daily fact of life for the children of the Blitz, and how they escaped the bombing and even played a part in civil defence.